Between 1917, when Britain issued the Balfour Declaration, granting Jews the right to establish a national homeland in Palestine, and 2025, when former U.S. President Donald Trump spoke of seizing Gaza and displacing its people, a series of events have reaffirmed the ongoing Western colonial strategy of controlling nations, exploiting their resources, and seizing their lands. While the Balfour Declaration emerged in an era of colonial expansion that followed two world wars, Trump's recent statements come under the pretense of defending the so-called global liberal order, which claims to uphold the right of nations to self-determination, an order that was supposedly established after World War II with the foundation of the United Nations. But rather than delving deep into the annals of history, let us turn back just a few decades to a time when colonial rule and genocide were supposedly consigned to the past and international organizations were established to protect human rights and even animal rights. In 1973, a cargo ship left the Chagos archipelago for the shores of Mauritius, carrying one of the last groups of indigenous Chagossians who had lived on those breathtaking islands for generations. But this was no ordinary journey. It was a forced displacement, as the islanders were compelled to abandon their homeland under the threat of military force. After decades of silence, Human Rights Watch revealed in 2023 that both the United States and the United Kingdom had committed 3 crimes against humanity against the Chagossian people. So why did Britain wait until 2016 to acknowledge its shameful actions against them? Chagos, a land stolen for imperialism. Situated in a strategic location in the Indian Ocean, the Chagos archipelago was part of Mauritius, which had been a British colony since 1814. But as the Cold War intensified, the United States saw the islands as an ideal location for a military base, particularly Diego Garcia, the largest island in the archipelago. However, this plan faced 2 major obstacles. How could Britain separate the Chagos Islands from Mauritius? How could it remove the indigenous people who had lived there for generations? When powerful nations unite, the interests of smaller nations and marginalized peoples become irrelevant, and human suffering is conveniently labeled as a necessary sacrifice for the greater good, which, of course, is determined by the Western white elite. In his book, Freedom Next Time, Australian journalist John Pilger reveals how Britain coerced the government of Mauritius into surrendering the Chagos Islands as a condition for its independence, in a secret deal with the United States. How did it happen? Before Mauritius gained independence, Britain pressured its prime minister at the time, Sir Siwasagar Ramgoolam, to sign an agreement granting Britain control over Chagos. The British ultimatum was clear: either you give up the islands, or you won't get independence. And so, in 1965, Mauritius gained independence, but at a heavy cost. It had lost the Chagos archipelago forever. But was this legal? According to international law, a colony cannot cede its land while still under colonial rule. This means the agreement was legally void from the start. In 2019, the International Court of Justice, ICJ, ruled that Britain's continued control of Chagos was unlawful and that the islands should be returned to Mauritius. However, Britain ignored the ruling and continued its occupation of the islands. After coercing Mauritius into surrendering the islands, Britain established the British Indian Ocean Territory, BIOT, in 1965, including the Chagos archipelago, with the primary aim of handing Diego Garcia to the United States for a military base. What was the price? The United States agreed to waive Britain's military debts worth $14 million, debts incurred from purchasing Polaris nuclear missiles for its submarines. But that wasn't all. The U.S. and Britain imposed 2 key conditions. The agreement had to remain highly classified to prevent Britain from being held accountable by the United Nations for maintaining colonial rule over a populated territory. The islands had to be completely cleansed of their indigenous inhabitants, ensuring no future legal claims for repatriation. Thus, the final order was issued. There will be no indigenous inhabitants, except for seabirds. John Pilger describes how the Chagossian community was once thriving and self-sufficient, relying on fishing and agriculture, with schools and medical facilities. But this flourishing society was completely destroyed through ruthless tactics. How was the eviction carried out? The British government falsely claimed that the Chagossians were merely temporary contract workers, rather than an indigenous people with deep roots on the islands. This allowed Britain to justify their expulsion without legal repercussions. Dogs were an integral part of Chagossian life, used for hunting and herding. The British military systematically killed the dogs, either by burning them alive or poisoning them with toxic gas, to create a climate of fear and force the people to leave. Britain stopped sending food and medical aid, making life on the islands unbearable. The Chagossians were crammed onto overcrowded cargo ships and transported to Mauritius and Seychelles without compensation. They were forcibly uprooted, prohibited from taking their belongings or even their livestock. History is repeating itself. Just as the Chagossians were forcibly displaced, there are now plans to do the same to the people of Gaza under false pretenses. Just as Chagos was sold in exchange for nuclear missile debt relief, Palestinian land is being sold off through political and military deals. But there is one crucial difference. The Chagossians had no means to resist. But in Gaza, there are men who have forced the world's most powerful armies to reconsider their actions. International laws bend to the will of the strong and crush the weak. But in Gaza, submission is no longer an option. If you believe that forced displacement is a crime, share this story and let the world know the truth.